I apologize for my appearance. I wasn't expecting you so fast. Is this her? You're positive? Because we don't need another mix-up. I had to replace the carpet after you dropped off that feral child raised by neckbeards that you found in the back of a Blockbuster.
Relax, man. Check it out. Hey, kid. Take off the hat and glasses.
My God.
She has all the signs. We double and triple checked them. She was raised on 9/11 footage. She cries when she sees a movie needlessly formatted in full screen. And her first word was collapse. The first thing she shot on her grandpa's camcorder was burning wreckage from a car crash outside of her house.
Damn.
Bro, her parents were in that car.
My God. It is truly you, child. As it was foretold. Amura un am es, the director of doom!
I have to take a fat piss. Can you come in? If I can.
Oh, of course, my child. I'll get your luggage. It's down and to the right.
Sick.
Do you want to know why you're here?
Sure.
Establishing shot. Do you see now? Wide shot. Do you see? Master shot. Do you see? Star wipe. Do you see? The screen is changing. Lens flare. Do you see now? Medium shot. Do you see?
Cowboy. Medium shot or cowboy. It's from the top of the head to just below the waist. Heard of it?
Yes, yes! You truly are Amura un Ames. You will document the doom. You will record the collapse. You will direct the great deflator of hopium and spread his word. Do you see?
Yep. Can we get tater tots now or what?
Oh, yeah, I guess, yeah, that's fine.
Cut. Action. Back to 1. Sound speed. Faster with more intensity. Kubrick. Bigelow. Scorsese. Tarantino. Anderson.
Jesus Christ, are you still studying? You graduated like 2 months ago.
Welcome back to part 2 of the Doom Report's examination of the Supreme Court and their heinous rulings of 2022. The last episode, we earnestly attempted to delve into the terrible impacts of the overturning of Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. Let's begin our examination of the sketchy Supreme Court rulings of 2022, starting with this hefty and unpleasant mouthful. Say it with me. Come on, everyone. And all of you at home, too, if you want. No judgment. This is a safe space of despair. All right, here we go.
The National Federation of Independent Business versus Department of Labor, Occupational Safety, and Health.
Very good, everybody. Now come on up and get your gift.
Hooray!
All right. Here you go. Hammer for Amara.
Sick. Landlord's gonna wake up to a surprise.
Let's see what we have for Sammy boy. That's a blend, so go easy. Oh my God!
All right.
I got a rock.
So did I.
And what would a PA ask of the Doom Reporter?
Nothing. except for to look upon the host of the Dumadrium one last time. For he is more brutal than all the nuclear waste beneath the earth.
Okay.
Actually, there was one more thing. No. I've been dealt a wound beyond all healing, for I have looked the last upon that which was doomiest. Henceforth I will call nothing doom unless it be his gift to me!
What was it?
I asked him for 1 hair from his silver chin, and he gave me 3. Afterwards he said, "Please don't hurt me."
I got a rock.
On January 13, 2022, the conservative bloc of the Supreme Court officially overturned the Occupational Safety and Health Administration's COVID-19 vaccine and testing mandate for businesses. Pestilence, the shy one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, upon hearing the news, was quoted as saying, "Yeah," as they profusely and repeatedly creamed themselves. If you're a large private employer with 100 or more employees and contain zero concern for COVID-19, or you're probably underpaid workers, then this was like having your horny bits caressed by the warm, damp breath of Wall Street God. The OSHA Emergency Temporary Standard, or ETS, was introduced on November 5th, 2021, and would impact roughly 84 million Americans. From the official OSHA COVID-19 vaccination and testing ETS fact sheet, the ETS is necessary to protect unvaccinated workers from the risk of contracting COVID-19 at work. The rule covers all employees with a total of 100 or more employees, with a few exceptions described below. Covered employers must develop, implement, and enforce a mandatory COVID-19 vaccination policy, with an exception for employers that instead adopt a policy requiring employees to elect either to get vaccinated or to undergo regular COVID-19 testing and wear a face covering at work. And from the SCOTUS opinion, quote, "OSHA has never before imposed such a mandate, nor has Congress. Indeed, although Congress has enacted significant legislation addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, it has declined to enact any measure similar to what OSHA has promulgated here. Promulgated. It sounds like something the custodial staff at high schools have to do after prom to get rid of the amorous teen fumes stinking up the gymnasium. The conservative bloc of SCOTUS ruled that OSHA did not have the mojo to institute a vaccine mandate on private employers because the law that created OSHA, quote, empowers the Secretary of Labor to set workplace safety standards, not broad public health measures, close quote. And then in May of this year, NBC News reported that the United States had reached 1 million deaths from COVID-19. So, what the fuck does OSHA know? How will this impact private employers going forward? Have you been out and about at all this year? Not a whole fuck of a lot. Private employers are currently subject to whatever state and local guidelines and restrictions exist in regards to COVID-19 protocols in the workplace. At least in Utah, you're more likely to witness Sasquatch going down on Nessie in Temple Square than you are to see anything with a whiff of COVID restrictions. Now, some good news in relation to the previous court decision. SCOTUS came through on Biden v. Missouri. Well, some of them anyway. This unsigned 5-4 court decision also came down on January 13th, 2022, this time backing the Secretary of Health and Human Services mandate that all staff working at health facilities that participate in Medicare and Medicaid get their goddamn COVID shot and protect their vulnerable patients from a fucking killer virus. The Secretary did allow for medical and religious exemptions. Justice Thomas's dissenting opinion was joined by Barrett, Gorsuch, and Alito. In early October, the Supreme Court rebuffed another challenge to the vaccine mandate, once again led by Missouri and 9 other states. I'm afraid this will be the last of the non-shitty rulings we'll be covering in this episode. Trundling along like an arthritic tortoise, we have a special investigative segment coming up right now. In the interest of lessening my workload and to add some drama and production to our humble show, we decided to hire an experienced professional private eye to look into 2 Supreme Court rulings. March 3rd, United States versus Zubaydah, and from June 30th, West Virginia versus Environmental Protection Agency. We reached out to badass PI Ezekiel Kane, but we couldn't afford the $90 per hour he absolutely deserves because the studio said we used our budget by keeping the time machine plugged in. So, instead, we used Craigslist for a more affordable option. A half bottle of cheap Canadian whiskey and the password to my OnlyFans account later, Mason Dixon, private eye, took the case.
Got a call on the horn from some comedy news shank who needed me to poke around into a couple of Supreme Court cases. Since I was on the nut, I took the job. First, United States versus Zubaydah. Decided to snoop around the safe house Zubaydah was held in Poland for clues. No dice. Uncle Sam's spooks had left the place cleaner than Granny's dentures on date night. I beat pavement back to my joint to go over newspapers about the case. Turns out Zubaydah, a Pakistani man, was nabbed by CIA goons in Palestine in 2002. Based on some shoddy intel, the G-men tortured the poor fellow for years, thinking he was some top dog in Al-Qaeda. They moved him around to black sites in places like Thailand and Poland for years, waterboarding him 83 times, put him through live burials and so-called rectal rehydration. Ooh, sounds like something I could use at the spa. Even lost his eye at some point. Eventually, the feds wised up and realized they had the wrong mug, but Zubaydah is still rotting in the clink at Gitmo, and the rub? He was never charged with a crime by the U.S. government. My noodle was cooked like an oversteamed hot link, so I let my flippers tickle some buttons before meeting up with my contact. Maybe he could tell me why, what was Zubaydah's story leaking out to the entire globe in gory technicolor and turned into books, articles, and movies. The Supreme Court, in a 7-2 decision, would try and shield the not-so-good old U.S. of A. from responsibility under the state's secret privilege. And why Sotomayor and Gorsuch were the only 2 justices to dissent? That's a pairing that shouldn't work. Like sardines and s'mores. And just my luck. My contact got whacked. With nothing new to go on, I decided to put mitts to mill and type up a report for that doomy newsie, and with a little help from my trusty eel juice to soothe my nerves. Something in my gut was telling me I was getting too close to the truth. They were trying to send me a message of death written on cadaver paper and proofread by the devil himself. After a careful examination of the facts, extensive soul-searching, and having 2 stiffs filled with more lead than a nuclear power plant show up in one night, I decided to put rubber to the road and shake down those eggheads at the EPA and find out why West Virginia had beef with them. 6-3 opinion from the big pants court said the EPA was going out of bounds. Oh God, Jesus, beat, I'm alert. Oh God, it's trying to off me. The government's trying to get me, oh mother, oh, wait, never mind. We're right as rain. Just one of those eye floaters. Anyway, what was I flapping my gums about? Oh yeah, 6 of those gavel fondlers felt that the EPA couldn't follow through on the Obama-era Clean Power Plan because it gave the EPA the brass cojones to go over the heads of Congress and push the utility companies to go greener with wind and solar. The conservative SCOTUS basically knocked the EPA down a peg, along with all the other federal agencies, and left it up to the goombas in Congress to legislate any future climate policy. And we all know how effective that'll be. It's like this is some kind of conservative grift to help the right undermine any attempts to rein the fossil fuel industry in and allow them to rake in all the cabbage before this goes up in smoke. How far does this conspiracy go? Congress? The Pope? God? Deep State Jesus? I can feel eyes on me at all times. My ears straining for the distant thunder of black helicopters coming to whisk me away to some CIA dungeon. I'm in deeper than a sea cucumber playing hide-and-seek in the Mariana Trench. It's time to ditch this assignment and go and fade into the night and forget I ever heard about the Doom Report.
Well, that just goes to show that you get what you pay for. Well, I'm going to jump back into this with New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. The 6-3 opinion came down on June 23, 2022, with Justice Thomas writing the majority opinion. With this ruling, the conservative bloc of the Supreme Court struck down a New York State law established in 1911 that required those applying for a concealed carry license to illustrate proper cause before walking around with a pistol under their coat or hat or cloaca. Wherever you prefer to stash your heater, I don't judge. From the CNBC article, quote, in his majority opinion, Thomas wrote that the New York's law violated the Constitution's 14th Amendment, which says citizens have a right to equal protection under the law, because it prevents law-abiding citizens with ordinary self-defense needs from exercising their right to keep and bear arms, as authorized by the Second Amendment. And also, quote, a state may not prevent law-abiding citizens from publicly carrying handguns because they have not demonstrated a special need for self-defense, Thomas wrote. This whole thing started when two members of the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, Brandon Koch, and Robert Nash, had their concealed carry handgun license applications for self-defense rejected. It was ruled by New York Supreme Court Justice Richard McNally that the two men failed to show proper need and cause to carry handguns outside their homes. Long story short, Nash and Koch kept challenging the courts and eventually got it kicked up to the Supreme Court, with the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association leading the charge. The day after the court's ruling, New York Governor Kathy Hochul announced that she would convene an emergency session of the legislature on June 30th to pass new gun safety legislation. On July 1st, the governor signed into law the Concealed Carry Improvement Act, and it would go into effect on September 1st, 2022. From the nyc.org Office of the Mayor post on August 31st, quote, on July 1st, 2022, New York State enacted Chapter 371 of the Laws of 2022 in response to the limitations set forth under the Bruin decision. The state law revises specific eligibility requirements to the concealed carry licensing process and restricts the carrying of concealed weapons in a specified list of sensitive locations. It also enhances safe storage requirements and background check coordination, as well as amends the state's existing body armor purchase ban to include hard body armor. Close quote. A series of lawsuits followed after that. And then, on October 6th, Chief Judge of the U.S. District Court in Syracuse temporarily blocked parts of the state's new gun law so the gun owners of America could pursue their lawsuit challenging the legislation. And then New York's Attorney General was like, fuck all that shit, and hit up the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit to keep the gun law in place while she appeals the judge's order. The three-judge panel was like, yeah, sure, we can do that, no problem. And, as of December 12th, this is where New York is at with their gun law. That three-judge panel has been giving out stay orders for this gun law like Olive Garden hands out breadsticks. The Bruin ruling hasn't just had impacts on New York State. Federal lawsuits have been filed in states like New Jersey and California referencing the Bruin decision, and, forgive the pun, targeting those states' various semi-automatic firearm bans. But what else are states supposed to do but create their own gun legislation? The Republican Party is notorious for blocking any substantive efforts by lawmakers to pass anything resembling meaningful firearm reform. The bipartisan Safer Communities Act that passed on June 25th, 2022 was the first bit of legislation in years that the House and Senate has managed to pass. It's almost miraculous. The GOP is always harping on the need for a smaller federal government so it doesn't place its smelly, lint-covered donger on the befuzzed upper lip of individual rights and freedom. I guess that's why the conservative-led Supreme Court felt the stirrings of the spirit to annihilate national abortion rights and place it in the purview of the states. Oh, the states and their rights. The Elephant Party loves going off about the holy sanctity of states' rights and how the feds need to keep their goddamn meat hooks off of them, until again, the conservative bloc of SCOTUS feels that burning in its bosom and decides instead to rule against states' rights. But this time it's for a good reason, because guns are sacrosanct and built into the hallowed foundations of America. And while states' rights are super important and a federal government that does almost nothing is best, well, I promise, gentle viewers, we will get into the whole U.S. gun issue in greater depth in a future episode. We're gonna get granular. Speaking of inspiration from on high, I feel directed to move on to Oklahoma v. Castro Huerta. Here it is in a terrible, moldy nutshell. On June 29th, 2022, in a 5-4 decision, the court ruled in favor of Oklahoma that the federal government and the state have concurrent jurisdiction to prosecute crimes committed by non-natives against native people on native lands. Justice Kavanaugh wrote the majority opinion, and his conservative counterpart, Justice Gorsuch, filed a dissenting opinion in which Justices Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan joined. For further context, let's go back to the year 2015. I know, it hurts my skull puddings as well to try and recollect that far in the past, but I shall persevere. During this forgotten time, a non-native person, Victor Manuel Castro Huerta, was charged by the state of Oklahoma for child neglect. That child was his Cherokee stepdaughter. He was convicted in state court and sentenced to 35 years in prison. At that point, Castro Huerta decided to appeal, arguing that the state lacked jurisdiction to prosecute because the crime took place on native land. Now, how did this end up at the feet of the Supreme Court? Let's take a super brief gander at the pivotal McGirt versus Oklahoma. In a 5-4 ruling on July 9th, 2020, the court ruled against Oklahoma's request to disestablish the Muskogee Creek Reservation, laying it down that only an act of Congress can undo a treaty, not the courts or state. This ensured that the eastern half of Oklahoma, a whopping 19 million acres, is native land. And that is super rad. But that didn't stop Oklahoma from petitioning the court over 30 bloody times in a feeble attempt to overturn the McGirt decision, along with shoehorning in the case with Castro Huerta. So the court was like, fine, whatever, Oklahoma, but we are going to shrink this down to the question of criminal jurisdiction. Please stop petitioning us. The court did an examination on whether Oklahoma has jurisdiction over crimes committed by non-native people against native people on native lands. And, as we're all painfully aware, the court royally screwed the pooch and each of its littermates. From this article from native.org, quote, according to Fawn Sharp, president of the National Congress of American Indians, prior to Castro, it had been unquestioned and understood for nearly 200 years that states do not have jurisdiction over non-Indian criminals who commit crimes against Indians in Indian country. After the court's decision, that is no longer the case. Before Oklahoma v. Castro Huerta, the federal government had exclusive jurisdiction in non-public law 280 states for any crimes committed by non-native offenders related to the Major Crimes Act and the General Crimes Act. Now states may get involved too, assuming they choose to do so and their existing state laws don't serve as impediments, close quote. And continued, quote, Oklahoma v. Castro Huerta sets an unfortunate new precedent. States have jurisdiction over native lands unless Congress acts directly to limit this power, or it's determined that states' jurisdiction unlawfully infringes on tribal sovereignty. Close quote. Well, this ruling will further enable other states to overturn hard-fought positive gains that the native peoples have made in a country famous for being incredibly hostile and underhanded in policies regarding indigenous issues and lives and futures. It also needlessly complicates issues of public safety within native lands by further muddying the already murky waters of police jurisdiction. Who do you call? Tribal police? State police? Which county? Do the cops even know? Are they going to show? Will the feds have to get involved? Who the fuck is going to prosecute? This would have driven Tony Hillerman to saw his own head off trying to figure out the logistics for his next Leaphorn and Chi novel. On Tuesday, September 20th, 2022, tribal leaders from across the country testified before a congressional subcommittee investigating the numerous negative impacts of the Castro Huerta ruling. The Interior and Justice Departments hosted 2 telephonic listening sessions with 425 tribal leaders, advocates, academics, and community leaders on September 26th and 27th of 2022. An official summary of which was posted in PDF format to the BIA.gov website, and you can find the link, along with all the other sources for this episode, in the show notes. The DOJ and the DOI asked for input on 3 main questions in a letter they sent out to tribal leaders on August 29th, 2022. 1. What is the impact of the Supreme Court decision on your law enforcement or justice systems? 2. Does this decision impact standing cooperative agreements or processes with state or federal agencies? If so, how? And 3. What has been the reaction to the Castro Huerta decision in your tribe? Do you have views about concurrent state criminal jurisdiction in Indian country? A quote from the official summary. All of the commenters stated that Congress had a constitutional role to determine tribal, federal, and state jurisdiction in Indian country. The majority of commenters stated the need for congressional action to fully restore inherent tribal jurisdiction in Indian country, close quote. The conclusion from the DOI and DOJ was basically, well, we'll take it under advisement. Thanks, Mayor Vaughn, that's helpful. I just don't know anymore, folks. Jesus God. Well, now let's talk about this very telling but unsurprising November 19th New York Times article that by now most of you are well aware of. Is that going to stop me from going on about it for several minutes? Of course not. I'm drunk with hosting power, and the sound of my voice is the only thing that soothes that which watches between the tattered veil. Terrifying unknown cosmic horror, or the title of my Lovecraftian slash fic about a great old one's exploration of the voyeurism kink? Put your guesses in the comments, or don't. You do you, gentle viewer. Anyway, back to the Times article. Remember back in May of 2022 when Associate Justice Alito's draft opinion for Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization was leaked? And then Chief Justice Roberts released a statement saying that they were opening an investigation and appointing the Supreme Court's Marshal Colonel Gail Curley with the task. Yeah? Okay. Well, 2 months after that, former anti-abortion Christian activist Reverend Ron Shank goes full whistleblower and fires off a juicy letter to the Chief Justice claiming to have information pertinent to the investigation about another leaked court decision. That decision? The 2014 Burwell v. Hobby Lobby case. And wouldn't you know it, Mr. Rob Shank has not received a response to his letter from anyone involved in the investigation as of this taping. Instead, he spilled it all to the Times and brought years of saved email communications. Before he saw the light and realized the damage he had been doing, Shank went hard in the paint for the Christian pro-life cause. The minister eventually became convinced that the best way to achieve their goal was to gain access to the conservative sitting justices of the court most supreme and go full Grima Wormtongue on their ears. The quote from the Times: "He gained access through faith, through favors traded with gatekeepers and through wealthy donors to his organization, abortion opponents whom he called stealth missionaries." Jesus Christ, stealth missionaries. I'll admit it though, if that was available to stream, I'd totally get baked and binge it. I mean shit, I would have watched Warrior Nun if Netflix hadn't decided to cancel it. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. Rob Shank called this effort the Ministry of Emboldenment. Quoting from the Times again. Mr. Shank recruited wealthy donors like Mrs. Wright and her husband Donald, encouraging them to invite some of the justices to meals, to their vacation homes, or to private clubs. He advised allies to contribute money to the Supreme Court Historical Society and then mingle with justices at its functions. He ingratiated himself with court officials who could help give him access, records show. All the while, he leveraged his connections to raise money for his nonprofit, Faith in Action. Mr. Schenck said he pursued the Hobby Lobby information to cultivate the business's president, Steve Green, as a donor. Close quote. Schenck couldn't approach the justices publicly because of his hardcore approach to anti-abortion activism that had landed him in jail several times. He was too hot. Not in a shirtless underwear model rolling around in garlic mashed potatoes way, but more akin to stolen jewelry that was unloaded at several sketchy pawn shops. So, to counteract his edgy reputation, Schenck accrued a team of like-minded wealthy donors, like some kind of Jesus's 11, and essentially coached them on how to properly approach and interact with the conservative justices. Woo them discreetly like Commander Riker would an alien princess forbidden to love. He instructed them to especially pursue the justices of the Supreme Court Historical Society annual dinners, because their guard was typically down and the booze probably didn't hurt. Once again from the Times. "See a justice, boldly approach," he told the couples, according to a briefing document reviewed by the Times. "If given the opportunity, bear witness to biblical truth. But don't push it," he said. "Your presence alone telegraphs a very important signal to the justices. Christians are concerned about the court and the issues that come before it." Close quote. The Supreme Court, hypothetically, follows an ethics code, but it's mainly self-enforced. They aren't supposed to discuss pending cases with anyone outside of the court. They also have to be careful to preserve the reputation of the court and maintain the illusion of at least being a legit institution by not acting like politicians and giving the impression that outsiders have carte blanche to influence or lobby the court. But justices are not required to disclose meetings with interested parties either. Schenck knew this and did everything he could to exploit whatever options he could to gain access to those elitist gavel bangers. His ace in the hole were philanthropists Gail and Donald Wright, a married couple from richer-than-you Ohio who made their wealth from real estate development. They were in tight with the Scalias, the Thomases, and especially the Alitos. Mr. Schenck alleges that Justice Alito leaked the 2014 Hobby Lobby ruling to his top stealth missionaries here, while the couple was hanging out with the Associate Justice, presumably indulging in rich people shit, like spilling hot celebrity gossip and eating caviar off the naked backs of the frightened kitchen staff. Anyway, a day after the dinner, on June 4th, of 2014, old Schenck is contacted by Mrs. Wright via email saying she had news. For the New York Times, quote, "Gail Wright, one of the pair, contacted Mr. Schenck, according to an email reviewed by the Times. Rob, if you want some interesting news, please call. No email," she wrote. According to Schenck, that phone call is when Mrs. Wright revealed that the court was going to rule in favor of Hobby Lobby and that Alito had written the majority opinion. Schenck, unable to contain himself, sent an email on June 29th, the day before the official ruling went public, to a Hobby Lobby staffer hinting strongly that the court decision was going to go favorably for their company. That same day, he rang Hobby Lobby's president, Mr. Steve Green, and let the cat out of the bag. And gadzooky dukes, just as Schenck had promised, the next day, on June 30th, the court's 5-4 ruling on Burwell v. Hobby Lobby Stores, Inc. dropped, with Alito delivering the court's opinion that family-owned corporations were having their religious rights violated for being required to pay for employee health insurance that covered contraception. That decision placed yet another hurdle in the way of birth control access and laid it out that corporations can claim religious rights. The LDS Church was doing that before it was cool. Am I right? Fellow Expos know what's up. Well, since this interview with the New York Times, Rob Schenck provided testimony on Thursday, December 9th, 2022, for a House Judiciary Committee looking to fortify Supreme Court ethics standards. Schenck, during the hearing, said, quote, I believe we pushed the boundaries of Christian ethics and compromised the High Court's promise to administer equal justices, Shank said of his campaign at the court. But I'm also conscious we were never admonished for the type of work our missionaries did, quite to the contrary. In one instance, Justice Thomas commended me, saying something like, "Keep up what you're doing, it's making a difference." Close quote. Well, of course, Republicans were not having any of it, and instead blamed the Dems of using the hearing to accost the poor, helpless conservative justices and get their filthy influence all over SCOTUS like hyperactive kids left alone with Sharpies and an unassuming wall. Pretty rich, considering that Mitch McConnell led the successful GOP effort to curtail Obama's efforts to appoint Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court in 2016 after Scalia passed on to whatever abyssal plane would take him in February of that year. In fact, Mitch the Lich announced their intentions hours after Scalia's passing that he would lead the GOP in the unprecedented action of blocking anyone Obama put up, because that privilege should go to whomever won the presidential election in 2016. Oh, how dare a black president affiliated with the Democratic Party in the twilight of their final year as POTUS do something so reckless and divisive as to fill the empty court slot with the likes of Merrick Garland, who was considered a SCOTUS darling even among several Republicans. Remember when former President Donald Trump tried to put up Amy Coney Barrett for the Supreme Court to replace the vacancy left by the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg in September of 2020, roughly 2 months before the presidential election, and then McConnell and the GOP did everything in their power to block anyone from being appointed to the highest court until after the election because, oh wait, never mind, they didn't do that, like at all. They did just the opposite of that. Now, let's take a look at some cases coming down the pipeline that have me on edge. First on my list, 303 Creative LLC versus Alenus. This free speech case involves the rights of a business owner who was squeamish about working with same-sex couples on their weddings because religion. The business owner in question, Lori Smith, runs a web design firm out of Colorado whose attorneys argue that her First Amendment rights were violated after a federal court stood by a Colorado law that says she must work with all people regardless of sexual orientation. This is all based on hypothetical fears from Lori Smith, whose business has not been approached by members of the LGBTQIA community for wedding services. The Supreme Court heard well over 2 hours of arguments on December 5th, 2022 on this constitutional test case. A test case, as quoted by the Cornell Law website, refers to, quote, legal actions brought with the intention of challenging or receiving clarification on a present law. The strategy usually involves creating a controversy to get into a court that otherwise would not lead to a legal action, because courts must have an actual dispute to hear a case. Since the goal is to make a court rule on a particular issue, litigants must strategically choose the right case to bring with beneficial facts, location, and timing, so that a court makes a ruling based on the issue brought by the litigants rather than on another issue. Litigants use test cases to get a favorable ruling by all levels of courts, but the practice most popularly has been used to get a ruling by the Supreme Court on an important issue, close quote. This test case bumps up against the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, or CADA, which prohibits businesses open to the public from being bigoted poop heads and discriminating against folks for sexual orientation and anything else these ghouls can think of. CADA defines discrimination not only as refusing to provide goods or services, but also publishing materials in any form that implies or explicitly states that patronage from those people is unwanted. Smith pushed to overthrow the lower court's decision to toss her case out, but the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals put the kibosh on her attempt, ruling that under CADA, Colorado must protect the interests of marginalized groups. Unfortunately, SCOTUS has already set a bad precedent with their 7-2 ruling in 2018 that sided with Jack Phillips, a Christian baker in Colorado who, in July of 2012, refused to bake a custom cake for a same-sex couple again because he didn't want to make his heavenly Father sad at him. That couple didn't want Mr. Phillips to bake something horrible or offensive, just a wedding cake to celebrate their love. Not like a cake with a bomb carefully installed inside of it to take out unsuspecting wedding guests, or a swastika-shaped cake. Not even something satany and whimsical like a cake with a pentagram constructed of demon willies, a penigram, if you could imagine such a thing. And I know you can. Cakey devil dong goodness. Second, students for Fair Admissions, Inc. versus Presidents and Fellows of Harvard College and University of North Carolina. Oral arguments for this case were held in front of the Supreme Court on Halloween of 2022. And it doesn't look good. For some background, Students for Fair Admissions, or the SFFA, is a conservative nonprofit run by Edward Blum. Blum is a conservative activist who has been crusading against affirmative action and anything adjacent to it for many years. In 2014, the SFFA filed lawsuits against Harvard College and the University of North Carolina. Why? Now, the group's assertion is that Harvard's admissions standards discriminate against Asian American applicants, while the University of North Carolina discriminates against white and Asian American applicants. From Reuters, quote, "The universities have said they use race as only one factor in a host of individualized evaluations for admissions without quotas, and that curbing the consideration of race would result in a significant drop in the number of Black, Hispanic, and other underrepresented students on campus," close quote. The Nation also covered this issue in this article from November 11th by Rachel Shin, which illustrates that abolishing affirmative action will impact many minority communities and exacerbate indigenous erasure in academia. From the article, quote, "As of 2021, American Indian and Alaskan Native students constituted 0.3% of Yale's enrollment, even though Native Americans make up 2% of the U.S. population." End quote. "The defense of affirmative action is a matter of survival and of critical existential importance to natives in higher education," said Laura Midkiff, co-chair of the Native and Indigenous Student Association at Yale. "Even now, ostensibly with 40 years of precedent and settled law, Indigenous students are fighting to not collapse into obscurity as a community," Laura Midkiff said. "It takes so much effort to just hold the bottom line every year. We're running the risk of seeing us really slip back decades." Close quote. Number 3 is Merrill v. Mulligan, where the Supreme Court will be asked to decide if the 2021 redistricting plan Alabama wants to execute for its 7 U.S. House seats violates Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination in voting. This ruling could affect how the lawmakers in other states draw up their congressional district maps. Alabama drew up this redistricting plan after the 2020 census. One of the districts in their sketchy plan is a majority Black district, registered voters, and several organizations challenged the map, arguing that Alabama had illegally packed Black voters into a single district while divvying up other clusters of Black voters across myriad districts. The ACLU noted that, quote, "While Black people are about 27% of Alabama's population, they are represented in only one of 7, or 14%, of congressional districts. Alabama, on the other hand, is arguing that drawing up a second district would be racially discriminatory by favoring Black voters." Really, Alabama? Really? That's the Gary Stars and Bars hill you want to die on? Anyway, earlier in the year, SCOTUS put the brakes on a lower court order requiring the state of Alabama to redraw its congressional districting maps. The lower court had ruled that the Republican-led state legislature's maps likely, maybe, totally fucking violated the Voting Rights Act by insidiously watering down black voting power. According to the ACLU, in November 2021, civil rights advocates sued Alabama after their shitty map was released, which is one single majority black district that includes, quote, part of Birmingham and some of the Black Belt in Alabama. Now, children, let's gather round and hear the fourth case on my list, Sackett v. Environmental Protection Agency. Once upon a time, in the starchy land of Idaho, at an enchanted vacation site called Priest Lake, a married couple, Michael and Chantel Sackett, decided to develop some property. That's what you do when you run an excavation company, I suppose. In April 2007, in order to get their lot prepped and ready for construction, they filled it in with magic gravel. Suddenly, with a dazzling flash of light, the EPA ferry came down and halted their project. "Nay," they said, "nay be upon thee, Sacketts, for this lot that thou hast spoiled with thine foul gravel is federally protected wetland. Under the Clean Water Act, thou must obtain a permit from me before laboring on with thine construction," the EPA ferry continued. According to legend and their legal team, the Pacific Legal Foundation, the Sacketts lacked a permit and so halted their project. The EPA ferry did, and issued an administrative compliance order and promises of fines of tens of thousands of dollars per day if they move forward with the construction. Legend and the PLF say that the Sacketts were not given an opportunity to dispute the claims. The Sacketts were very distraught. What were they to do? In 2008, they decided to sue. And for the next 14 years, the case wiggled and wormed, snaked and slithered, labia majored and minored its way through the federal court system. In 2012, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit unanimously ruled that the couple stand before the EPA ferry's order of compliance and their penalties and challenged them. And so they did. And the EPA ferry tore up the order, but still insisted upon a permit for construction. Finally, the case ended up at the feet of the Supreme Court. On the 3rd of October 2022, the court heard arguments most oral. And they say that the case is pending still until it rises from the grave and decides the fate of water everywhere in the kingdom of states united. Seriously though, this case will determine how broadly the Environmental Protection Agency can define waters of the United States via the lens of the Clean Water Act. But that's just the surface. The quality and safety of our water is at stake here. The quote from this Vox article from September 27, 2022, "The Clean Water Act prohibits discharge of pollutants into navigable waters, but it also defines the term navigable waters vaguely and counterintuitively to include all waters of the United States, including the territorial seas. In Raponos v. United States, 2006, the Supreme Court's last attempt to define the key phrase, waters of the United States, the justices split three ways, with no one approach winning majority approval from the court," close quote. And the article continues, quote, "Even in the best case scenario for environmentalists, the court's new majority is likely to embrace the narrow reading of the Clean Water Act proposed by the late Justice Antonin Scalia in his Rapanos opinion. That approach, according to an amicus brief filed by professional associations representing water regulators and managers, would also exclude 51%, if not more, of the nation's wetlands from the Act's protections, and could potentially exclude an even greater percentage of the nation's streams," close quote. West Virginia, the EPA, is probably a pretty good indicator of how this conservative-controlled court will go. That ruling hamstrung the EPA's regulatory powers surrounding the Clean Air Act by claiming extraordinary overreach by the EPA. The plaintiffs in Sackett have created a fun and whimsical reading of the Clean Water Act that is more restrictive than what was proposed by any of the justices in Rapanos. If they get their way, a vast amount of streams, draining ditches, dainty little tributaries, etc., that may flow into major bodies of water could suddenly lose the protections laid out by the Clean Water Act. Again from Vox, quote, "The stakes in Sackett are high because America's waterways are so interconnected. Wetlands, even wetlands that do not directly border rivers or lakes, act as filtration systems that slow the seepage of pollutants into major waterways. And they also act as sponges that help control floods, small streams, human-made drainage, and other narrow waterways typically empty into other bodies of water. So if wetlands, streams, and the like are not protected from pollution, that pollution will inevitably poison major waterways," close quote. An important component of our survivability in these United States hangs in the balance of a conservative-led court that has been hostile to environmental regulations. Our wetlands are home to countless insects, fish, birds, amphibians, reptiles, et al., and is vital to our complex ecosystem as the coral reefs and rainforests. But none of that matters in a brutal capitalist system hell-bent on strip mining every last resource for profit. So viewers at home, take a big swig of nanoplastic-infused water, and let's get into the final future case we will be covering this episode, Harper v. Moore. This one could go really bad for us and make going to the voting booth an act of futility. The court heard oral arguments earlier in December 2022. Essentially, the ruling could allow state legislators the ability to set the rules for federal elections. The juicy marrow of this case is from a legal theory called the independent state legislature doctrine that they dug out of the Constitution's election clause. Quote, "The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof," close quote. From the ACLU, quote, "The theory asserts that when it comes to making state laws that apply to federal elections, from drawing congressional district lines to determining the who, what, when, where of casting a ballot, only the state legislature itself has the power to set the rules. The theory claims that the state legislature's power is so exclusive that they can ignore the requirements of their own state constitution, including the fair districting requirements that the North Carolina Supreme Court has enforced under its own state constitutional power of judicial review," close quote. So, if that goes through, well, to what little rights and liberty we have left, I say, farewell and adieu, dear fair Spanish ladies. Farewell and adieu, ye ladies of Spain. For we've received orders we're to sail back to Boston, and so ne'er more shall we see ye again. I think it's about time that we check in with Jasmine to see what our future holds. Sam, perform the conjuration.
Nat 20.
Wait a minute, you don't need to roll to cast a spell. Did you remember to prepare the summoning spell for today?
Yes.
Are you lying to me, Sam?
No. Yes. Yes.
Just send the text to IT.
I already did, buddy. She's on screen.
I knew that. Jasmine! How's every little thing?
Shh! It'll hear you.
What will hear me?
The Skotar, it's hunting me.
The... what now? Skotar?
Yes, the Skotar derives its name from SCOTUS. It's the Supreme Court. All of it. It's one hulking blasphemy against nature.
What the hell is that exactly?
They say the SCOTAR was created in an underground CIA black site. Tired of the inefficiency of the court, the government decided to engineer their own ultimate judge they'd control.
That sounds very not good.
Word is, by using illegal cybernetic technology and genetic manipulation, they combined the DNA of all 9 judges and uploaded every court case into each of their 9 heads.
9 heads?
Heads growing out of all over that thing. Shoulders, back, neck.
Even on its no-no place?
Yes, Nicholas. Even there.
Cool. Does it have, like, giant gavels for arms?
Don't be ridiculous. They use swords, like the Lady Justice statue. Anyway, legend goes that it got out before they were done programming it, or training it, or whatever the fuck they were trying to do. And it's been passing judgment ever since. It's so hot during the day, it mostly comes out at night. Mostly.
Forgive me for asking, but why are you outside with that thing roaming around?
We were out with a group, looking for supplies. We were heading back when we got ambushed by the SCOTAR. 6 heads ruled against us, the other 3 dissented. Then it was all screams, swords, and blood.
Metal.
It got Jimmy.
The camera guy?
Afraid so.
Damn. Rip Jimmy. I'll send you another one.
I guess I'm done running. It's time for some payback.
Don't!
For Jimmy!
Well, and now it's time for Greg Orham with Doom on Film.
Hello, welcome back to Doom on Film. It's me, Greg Orham, coming to you from my bunker in an undisclosed area. You will not see me on the streets. You will not see me anywhere else. I am just here. This week, we have a very special movie. It's called Look Who's Talking. And I know sometimes these movies have bad messages or are a little depressing, but this one just tickles me pink. It's about a baby, but get this. The baby can talk. He says, you wouldn't believe some of the stuff this guy says. You just gotta watch it. It's absurd. He's got so many little baby thoughts that you wouldn't think that a baby would say. It's like a grown man, but again, is this little guy right here. It's really special. You should probably watch it when you're having like a real down day. This will pick you right back up again. Look Who's Talking. It's got a baby on it, so I would assume it's okay for the whole family. Yeah. Alright. Well, bye.
So, what do we do from here? Well, I'm hungry, so let's go get something to eat. Come on, let's go.
What do you want to do from here to go?
Collectively, what now? With a 6-3 conservative supermajority, the Sinister Six aren't shying away from taking on cases that suit the right's agenda. Whereas before they may have been more reticent to accept a case involving more controversial issues because they weren't as sure where that deciding one vote might be coming from. It's much like the classic dilemma of picking teams for dodgeball on the schoolyard. You used to have 2 kids left to choose from. One, a prepubescent monster that can grow a beard thicker than your dad's. The other, well, just picture a stick figure with whooping cough. Now, there's an extra monster child with a stick and poke tattoo on his chin that says, "Gimme your lunch money." And you don't have the last pick. How do we fight against the conservative force that can't be bargained with, that can't be reasoned with, that doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and that absolutely will not stop, ever, until we are dead? A force that will do whatever it takes to get what it wants, no matter the cost, hell-bent on reshaping the country into a fascist monstrosity because they understand that their ideology and tactics are becoming less appealing to the American voter base. So they push relentlessly to undermine voting rights and find new underhanded ways to pour dark money into their political machine. And they have an ace in the hole, one Leonard A. Leo. Mr. Leo had a long stint with the Federalist Society, a conservative legal group obsessed with constitutional originalism that found the lamest use of James Madison's head profile. Leo eventually became the vice president of that group before becoming the trustee and chairperson of the Marble Freedom Trust, another conservative political advocacy group using its fat stacks of cash to further nefarious right-wing agendas. This man has been instrumental in reshaping the Supreme Court into the conservative fist of domination we enjoy today. Leo assisted Clarence Thomas back in 1991 during the now Associate Justice's Supreme Court confirmation hearing. Leo spearheaded the campaign to support the nominations of Roberts, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. All with ties to the Federalist Society, by the way. Golly gee willikers, the fun never ends. Yuck! Enough about Leonard. Back to the question, what now? What do we do about curbing further abuses of the court? Well, one idea that's been bandied about is expanding the size of the court and then packing it with liberal, progressive justices to counterbalance the skullduggery of the Leo gang. That might work for a season, but it will eventually be turned against the Democrats when the GOP just tosses in more of their preferred justices to water down the influence of the liberal justices and so on and so forth. Time is a flat circle, yada manada, etc. Eventually culminating into some kind of Thunderdome shit. 2 justices enter, 1 justice leaves. Another proposed reform for the court comes from Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, which was explored in this 2020 article from Vox. Essentially, the plan is to rotate judges from the Supreme Court with those in the lower district and circuit court of appeals, since the SCOTUS characters of lifetime appointments not necessarily lashed to just the Supreme Court, but to federal level courts in general. By doing this, Sanders hopes to dilute the potency and influence of any one associate justice, like cutting a pile of cocaine with Excedrin before taking it to the Hollywood pitch meeting. SCOTUS members have from time to time taken a temp job on a lower court, but it was done through their express consent, and no president or act of Congress can force them. Another popular solution to help alleviate SCOTUS-style horseshit is to do away with lifetime appointments and set up some term limits. And remember when I was going over the New York Times article about Reverend Schenck and how sitting members of the Supreme Court have a self-imposed honor system to avoid corruption that isn't at all enforced, like at all. Well, might be nice to pass some legislation to impose some actual legal consequences for criminal acts. Hell, while we're dreaming, let's just abolish the court and dismantle the whole god-awful U.S. justice system. Throw it on the bonfire and salt the earth, and create something that isn't reliant on the brutal exploitation of everyone that isn't part of the white, wealthy, male Christian elite. Well, that's our show, good people. Thank you for sticking with us while we iron out the wrinkles and detangle the snags of producing a YouTube show in a more timely manner. We appreciate everyone who has ever liked, subscribed, shared, commented, or recommended the Doom Report to a friend, family member, screeching phantasm, or friendly animal in your general vicinity. Find us on Instagram at The Doom Report, and on the rapidly burning barge of the damned that is Twitter at Real Doom Report. We're going to be tackling all things COVID with our next episode. Feel free to suggest future topics down in the comments. And as always, stay safe and look out for each other. And it's time for this Doom Reporter to eat. Good night.
I'm worried about my grandson. He took some new kind of blow at a party and it's changed him.
Changed him? How?
He's a cocaine vampire.
You got the stuff. Thanks.
Tracer, we've got a cocaine vampire on the loose. I need to know how to find it and kill it before it snorts every gram in the city.
They like seedy bars, dance clubs, police evidence rooms, anywhere they can score some lines. And the only way to cure it is...
I ain't trying to cure it.
Oh, well, then, like a gun or a knife, should take it out. Hello? Hello? Ezekiel?